Gemini would demonstrate two-man spaceflight, qualifying all systems in manned flight, and test the ability to maneuver a spacecraft using the orbital attitude and maneuvering system called OMS.
Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Gus Grissom, one of the original Mercury astronauts, and Navy Commander John Young, a newcomer, were America's first Gemini twins to fly.
The two Gemini mission simulators were delivered to NASA during the year. On November 9th, the prime flight crew for that mission began training on the Cape Kennedy simulator. Command pilot Walter Schirra and pilot Thomas Stafford are the backup flight crew. The mission simulator is also tied in with a control center and tracking network to provide simultaneous training of flight controllers. The simulators are computer-driven and controlled by an instructor at the console. The instructor can program a part of the mission or the entire mission from pre-launch to post-landing on tape. Critical portions of the mission can be rerun and emphasized. Problems and errors unknown to the astronauts can be introduced at any time by the instructor. The crew must immediately recognize the problem, evaluate it on the spot, and take corrective action as though faced with that problem in actual flight. Crews for GT-3 are scheduled for approximately 120 hours of mission simulator training. This may be compared with the estimated 5 hours of the mission itself. Pre-mate interface inspections were conducted, followed by preparations for mating. Then the spacecraft was mechanically mated to the launch vehicle. In the course of electrical mating, interface and validation tests were conducted. A joint combined systems test proved compatibility of the spacecraft, launch vehicle, and launch complex, and tests verified umbilical ejectability and other programmed performances. Extensive preparations were then made for a complete simulated launch test of the combined spacecraft and launch vehicle. Both cabin and adapter oxygen supplies were serviced and tested. Suit tests were conducted. Radio frequency compatibility tests were conducted. The reentry control system and the orbital attitude maneuvering system were serviced with their flight loads of hypergolic fuel. The simulated launch test, called a wet mock, was a complete 4-day checkout of the entire space vehicle and launch procedures. Following the wet mock simulated launch and final systems tests, separate flight readiness review meetings were held for both spacecraft and launch vehicle. A final simulated flight test was then conducted. Except for simulation cables and disconnected explosive devices, the spacecraft was in actual flight condition. In this simulation, the combined Gemini-3 space vehicle, the launch complex, the worldwide tracking network, and mission control participated. The integrated operations of all systems, including the onboard crew, were verified in various flight modes. After final simulated flight tests, an overall review by the Mission Review Board, composed of key personnel of NASA, the Department of Defense, and contractors, certified the space vehicle ready for launch.
Television and radio networks spent several weeks re-establishing broadcast facilities at the Cape Press site for the first American manned spaceflight since the end of Project Mercury in 1963. Vice President Humphrey, chairman of the National Aeronautics and Space Council, flew in to observe this important first flight. Over 700 news media representatives from the U.S. and many foreign nations covered the event.
At Cape Kennedy, 2 months and 4 days after the second unmanned Gemini flight, Command Pilot Virgil Grissom and Pilot John Young were suited for the first manned mission, GT-3. It was 2 hours before launch, March 23, 1965. The astronauts arrive at the pad and walk up the ramp. At 9 minutes past 7 o'clock, they entered the gantry elevator and took the short ride to the White Room. The astronauts enter the Erector White Room surrounding the spacecraft. They disconnect the portable air conditioners and remove their outer shoe coverings. Final adjustments are made after flight crew ingress. Technicians close the cabin hatches and begin securing them. The astronauts are integrated into the countdown at this point. The count continued with precision. There were no important holds. With power up, the final countdown proceeds. The final, orderly, careful procedure of pre-flight testing.
Mod 3. 3, go. Mission monitor. Go. Project engineering. Go. Pad safety.
Pad safety, go.
SRO.
SRO's go.
Roger. Spacecraft test conductor.
Roger, all systems are green and go.
At T-minus 3 minutes, the onboard computer receives the latest updated launch data. At T-minus 10 seconds...
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
1, 0, 1,
Engine start.
2, 3, liftoff.
Liftoff. 142400. 142400. Liftoff.
Gemini-3 lifted cleanly from the pad at 9:24 Eastern Standard Time and rose vertically above Cape Kennedy. The launch vehicle accelerated smoothly through the programmed flight phase.
Flight Fido, good on that. Roger, Fido.
Running the pitch program now.
The clock's in sync, flight. Roger, how you guiding? How you guiding? Where go, flight, both system. Roger. How you, Surgeon? Surgeon, go. GNC? Go, flight. Ecom, go.
Last 50 seconds. Roger.
Sounds good.
Flight Fido, set on by 3. Roger.
Roger.
How you guiding? Where go, flight? Flight Fido, good here on my 3. Roger. Network, meet me on the flight dynamics off. How you, GNC? Go, flight.
Vapor trails mark the path of Gemini-3 as it passes through maximum Q.
There's the cabin, Econ. Good. Peak pressure 65 and dropping now.
Party, it's still going good.
DCS update received.
FCC, let us know when max Q comes up, please.
Roger, update.
How you, Fido? We're a little high at flight, but no problem. Roger.
We're a little bit high on the flight path, but no problem. On the ground. Okay, ground's go for staging. Roger, looks good from here. Roger.
CMs are ready for staging.
How you, Booster? Booster is go. Flight Econ, cabin, shield 5, flight Fido, coming up on staging, a little high,
Receive the
okay.
second update.
Roger.
Okay, there is staging. Roger, stage.
Staging.
And we're trusting.
Stage 2 thrust looks good. Flight
Okay,
2
thrust
flight
looks
below.
good.
The first stage engine separated, and the second stage engine propelled the spacecraft toward orbit. At T plus 5 minutes and 34 seconds, second stage engine cutoff occurred, and the mission director confirmed orbital insertion.
We're go. Roger. Capcom, we're go.
Roger, you are go, Molly Brown.
GT3 entered orbit at some 17,500 miles per hour, establishing an apogee of 139 statute miles and a perigee of 100 statute miles.
Okay, Captain. Look better from there than on a ballistic flight?
Again.
Does it look better from there than on a ballistic flight? Roger, how do it look?
It looks great.
Right.
Flight, everything looks good on the maneuver.
As the tracking network followed the first orbit over the southwest United States, the command pilot performed the Texas burn. He fired 2 thrusters of the orbital attitude and maneuver system for 1 minute and 49 seconds.
We have negative standby carrier. He may not be set up for it.
Roger. Confirm maneuver complete.
This created a new orbit with a perigee of 98 4/10 statute miles and an apogee of 104 statute miles. Over the Indian Ocean and in the second orbit, successful translation maneuvers resulted in a change of orbital plane. Of particular interest are the still photographs Pilot Young took from the spacecraft during the mission. This series of exposures was made during the second orbit at an altitude of 90 miles over Mexico. We can see the nose of the spacecraft in the lower left frame. The top of the screen is north. The United States-Mexican border is dead center. The Sonora Desert is outlined by the Colorado River, which extends as a white line forward of the nose of the spacecraft. Cloud cover obscures the Imperial Valley area of the United States in the upper left screen, but the Pinacate volcanic fields of Mexico can be distinguished to the right of the spacecraft. East of Hawaii, on the third and final orbit, Ohm's thrusters again reduced velocity. This maneuver would have established a new orbital perigee of 51 7/10 statute miles had the flight continued beyond 3 orbits. Three on-board experiments were conducted during the mission of GT3. The first, planned to study the effects of zero gravity on cell growth of sea urchin eggs, was unsuccessful because of a failure in the experiment's apparatus. Pilot Young conducted 2 experiments. First, he exposed human blood samples to the combined effects of phosphorus-32 radiation and zero gravity. Then, during reentry, he injected distilled water in pulses into the ionized layer around the spacecraft as a technique for establishing communications during the blackout period. Both experiments proved successful. Then at T plus 4 hours and 33 minutes, the retro rockets were fired for a normal reentry.
4, 3, 2, 1, retrofire.
Rocket 3. Rocket 2. Rocket number 4. Molly Brown, you can see my rocket fire now? Rocket fire copy and attitude to right center. Roger, pass your RVR readout on the ground. Is RTV out? Molly Brown, Brahma's Capcom. Do you copy?
The command pilot flew the spacecraft in during reentry.
Right, 4 up. Right in the center. An automatic superfine retrofire down to 1.
Roger, I copy. 331 aft.
This is Gemini Control. The latest report from downrange says this is a direct contact with an airplane in the area with the Molly Brown pilot and the command pilot. They advise the airplane that they are staying in the spacecraft. However, they are removing their suits. Apparently, they're a little warm. We'll try for an exact temperature down there. I repeat, they are staying in the spacecraft, but they are taking off their space suits. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. Our latest advisory from downrange places the carrier Intrepid 42 miles from the spacecraft. This would indicate an additional sailing time of approximately an hour and 20 to 30 minutes. Approximately 80 to 90 additional minutes before the Intrepid is alongside. We have an additional item on the crew. They're reported to have opened their hatches. They're taking a nice breath of air and giving a thumbs-up signal to any and all passing airplanes. This is Gemini Control.
Helicopters and recovery aircraft took off from their stations and began the preliminary search of the prime recovery area. Spacecraft 3 splashed down approximately 59 miles from the planned landing point. Navy swimmers jumped into the sea and attached a flotation collar for additional stability against the fairly heavy swells of the Atlantic. Search aircraft located the position by homing in on the spacecraft's recovery beacons. A trailing stream of green dye in the ocean aids in sighting the spacecraft from the air.
This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. Our latest reports from downrange have helicopters in the area over the Molly Brown spacecraft. Swimmers have been deployed. A flotation collar now rings the spacecraft. It's floating very nicely. The latest estimate, and I'm sorry if there is confusion over these estimates, we've tried to relay them as fast as they've come in. They've come from many sources. Our latest estimate places the spacecraft some 58 miles from the carrier. I'd like to correct an earlier indication that the carrier would be alongside in 50 minutes. I think we should revise that to more like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. Again, that is only a tentative estimate. When things are a little bit more secure, we'll pass that information on. This is Gemini Control.
After 40 minutes, the astronauts were picked up by helicopter and flown to the aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid.
This is Gemini Control. Our latest advisory from downrange indicates that a helicopter pickup will be made. A helicopter pickup will be made of the crew, and the helicopters will return them to the carrier Intrepid, now some 40 miles from the spacecraft. Meanwhile, Vice President Humphrey has been on the floor of the control center the past 10 minutes. He's passed among all the flight controllers, I think shaking the hand of each one. Very pleased about the mission. We now can confirm that the astronauts are in the helicopters, both astronauts in helicopters, and are being returned to the carrier at this time. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. The helicopter bearing Gus Grissom and John Young is now over the deck of the carrier Intrepid. Momentarily it'll touch down. A red carpet has been spread out on the deck of the Intrepid. I'm advised literally thousands of white-suited sailors are deployed around the deck, ready to cheer the arrival of these two spacemen. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. Gus Grissom stepped out of the helicopter only moments ago aboard the carrier. He was described as having a big smile on his face, waving to the crowd of sailors that are thronging around the helicopter. John Young following several steps behind him, both of them obviously quite happy, looking great after a splendid 3-orbit mission. This is Gemini Control. This is Gemini Control. Our two astronauts were met on a red carpet by Rear Admiral Donald M. White and other ranking officers of the Intrepid.
The captain of the Intrepid and his officers added their congratulations for the achievement, and the astronauts proceeded to their medical examination. As the carrier proceeded ahead to recover the spacecraft, congratulations were in order for the astronauts. The command pilot, Virgil Grissom, had executed 2 spacecraft orbital changes for the first time in manned flight. He had, in effect, reduced the altitude of his orbit, a total of 87 statute miles, by 2 ohms burns. Using the same thrusters, he also performed precise orbital plane changes, essential for rendezvous and docking with a target vehicle. They initiated the use of the Gemini spacecraft as an orbiting laboratory, and they executed the first manned, controlled lifting reentry. Spacecraft 3 was soon recovered from the ocean by the Intrepid. Hoisted by crane on deck, it had survived reentry with no visible damage. The heat shield and afterbodies withstood the maximum temperature of reentry with minor charring of the surface. The flag and lettering United States painted on the spacecraft still retained bright markings. The optimism gained during real-time flight was confirmed by analysis of the recorded data. No problems of any significance emerged. The objectives of GT-3 were fully realized.
The welcome home at the Cape and Cocoa Beach, Florida, was representative of the feeling of all America.
The Gemini program team continued working toward an early flight of GT-4 and the long-duration mission of 4 days. Now definitely on manned flight status, Project Gemini moves forward.